The next morning, Bruckner was back at the arena, preparing with Rixton for his next bout. It was still raining, and cold water sluiced in through the overhead grates, pattering to the stone ground underfoot. As he quaffed a potion of the strength of the fathers prepared for him by Tadalac, the Andoli maiden said to him, "Your next opponent is a real piece of work, a nasty, cruel fellow, quite capable in the ring, but not well liked by anyone. He keeps coming back to fight, and the people like seeing him, but not because they like him, you understand. If you can take Slist Enerware down, you'll earn even more of the crowd's love." The Cormorantian youth soon found himself back in front of the grate leading into the ring. The rain was still coming down in a steady drizzle, though the crowd, well protected under the awnings that covered the seats surrounding the amphitheater, seemed excited and ready for action. The announcer's voice once again boomed out through the stadium, promising another good fight to all the patrons.
"Returning," he crowed dramatically, "after his perfect victory over Perm Greatshield, is the newcomer, Johannes Bruckner, the Black Blade."
The crowd roared in approval, and Bruckner's gate swung open, admitting him onto the field. He stepped forth and hoisted the sword before the crowd, who howled in approval.
And his opponent, the Cold Fire, the Cruel Impaler, Slist Enerware.
The crowd booed and hissed, and onto the field stepped a thin and hard-looking male elf, holding a long spear. He lifted the tip to the sky, and it burst into magical flame, raindrops sizzling as they hit the blade. He wore silvery chainmail and had long blonde hair tied back in a bun at the back of his head. The fair skin of his face was marred by a curving pink scar that wound down one cheek all the way to the top of his neck. He had a sharp beaked nose and cruel black eyes. He pointed his burning spear at Bruckner dangerously, his eyes flaming with cold fire to balance the spear's heat. As the crowd fell silent in expectation, the two warriors drew close, circling one another. As they closed, winding in an ever tighter spiral around each other, Bruckner leapt forward suddenly, slashing at Slist with his sword and catching him on the thigh, his black blade finding the spot where the chain shirt ended. The sword bit deep. Bruckner could feel the edge bang against the bone, and blood welled up from the spot, dripping down Slist's leg. The sword flashed with holy might, and Bruckner knew that the enchantment cast by the old wizard at Lyle's Emporium was working against this cold-eyed fiend. Slist roared in response and jabbed back with his spear, but Bruckner feinted left, and the blade barely missed his cheek. The elf was as quick as a mongoose, and he danced backward, attempting to find a more favorable range. Bruckner was swifter, though, and he leapt after him, swinging once, then again in a follow-up backhand. He opened a rent in Slist's chainmail with the first strike, but the elf parried the backhand with a whirl of his spear, then countered with a brutal thrust aimed at Bruckner's gut. But the youth brought up his shield and turned the blow aside. He swung at Slist again, but a gust of wind whipped a spray of rain into Bruckner's face, and his swing went wide. The spear-wielding elf slashed at Bruckner, but he got his sword up in time, batting the polearm away. Bruckner stabbed forward then, hard, but Slist sidestepped the young man's sword at the last instant, bringing his own spear up in retaliation, and finally found his mark. The burning, triangular blade head plunged deep into Bruckner's left shoulder. The youth felt the muscles tearing and slicing, and the burning spear tip cauterizing the ravaged flesh instantly, the heat searing through his whole upper body. Behind his spear, Slist's face was twisted into an ugly, bloody grin. Bruckner's shield arm went dead, the metal kite lying helpless at his side. Slist was trying to rip his weapon free from Bruckner's shoulder. He wrenched and pulled the lance loose. Bruckner gasped, then with a final surge of righteous energy roared out a battle cry and plunged his sword straight through Slist's chest. The black blade burst through the back of his chain shirt, scattering tiny steel rings onto the dusty arena floor. Slist's eyes rolled back in his head, and with a slight, shocked inhalation, he dropped off of Bruckner's sword, slamming into the blade ground. The crowd went berserk, chanting Bruckner's name, others calling, "Black Blade!" 3 halfling healers sprinted onto the field, administering to Slist. A 4th began tending to the youth from Cormorant. The gate he had entered from opened, and Bruckner could see Rixton leaning against the side of the wall, looking impressed. He could just make out the soft voices of the halflings, speaking in Celestial as they magically sealed Slist's wounds. As Bruckner was enjoying the taste of victory, and as the fourth healer finished closing his own deep wound in the shoulder, suddenly all of the noise and commotion in the arena was punctuated by an angry roar as Slist, now conscious, knocked one of the small healers away and staggered to his feet, still dripping blood from the half-closed chest wound. He threw himself at Bruckner like a deranged animal, his spear shaking, but pointed straight at the youth's neck. Before the elf could close the first 10 feet between the two, however, 5 blue bolts of energy appeared from behind and above Bruckner's head, whirling together in an elegant spiraling pattern to catch Slist in the chest, knocking him back 15 feet, prone to the ground. Bruckner looked up to see a tall man with a regal white beard, wearing flowing blue robes, standing in one of the premier boxes near the edge of the arena.
"Rixton!"
he called out.
"Have the man tied, then raised. Then get him out of here, to Carolo."
The crowd didn't seem all that surprised by this event, though they were excited by it. Before the man in blue resumed his seat, he looked to Bruckner, and nodded with an air that seemed to indicate he was impressed with the youth's performance. Rixton led Bruckner up to Waynfield once again to collect his prize after he had been paid by a grudgingly impressed Braden. The fat man greeted the two energetically, saying with effeminate cheer, "Oh, Bruckner, you were absolutely splendid. By the way you sidestepped the nasty man's strikes. He is a beast, and I'm glad, very glad indeed, that the arena has a proper champion." He presented Bruckner with a small chest stuffed with gold pieces, as well as a very choice emerald set in a silver band. After the fight, the group went shopping. Nima picked up some poisons and additional armaments, as well as a potion of concentrated fear. They purchased healing draughts and other odds and ends. After this, the trio headed back to the military encampment. When the group were ushered into General Alexander's tent, they found him speaking with Toril, Inquisitor Heartstone, and a tall woman with long black hair that flowed nearly to her waist. She was flanked by 2 burly guards with long spears. She wore very fine cloth, and a glittering diadem sat upon her brow with an emerald deep green in the middle. General Alexander gestured the 3 in and said,
"Bruckner, Nima, Tadalak, may I introduce the Lady Nessiela Carolo, Regent of King Sazarkand, current ruler in His Majesty's stead of Enchulich."
Lady Carolo inclined her head in response to Bruckner's bow.
"It's a pleasure to meet you all, the snarers, or should I say saviors of Jennison, and each quite capable in your own right, it would seem. The town is buzzing with word of the prowess of the Black Blade in the arena, and Heartstone has told me of your daring mission into the heart of the Walker's Sanctum, Nima. Very impressive. And Tadalak, is it? I am personally honored to welcome an able mage into my city. We practitioners of the subtle arts are scarce here, but that only makes us all the more valuable."
She winked at Tadalak, who turned bright red and kicked the ground bashfully, stammering out a, "Thank you, my lady." She continued,
"I've been appraised of the plan, and it's satisfactory, though care must be taken. Nima, Bruckner, you'll return to the Walker's Temple and proceed with your informant as you've planned, though I want you to avoid giving yourselves away. In the future, we may have further cause to be glad of an inside informant. And I think these will solidify their trust in you."
She handed to each of them a small pin made of dark ebon wood with a glowing orange crescent set into it.
"This is a secret sigil that King Sazarkand uses occasionally with some of his more clandestine operatives. It's not a symbol widely known and will not benefit you with many, but the upper echelons of the Walkers should recognize it, and they'll treat you with more caution and respect once they do. I leave the specifics of this operation to you, but do not reveal yourselves, and make certain that the raid proceeds at the appointed time. Tadalak, you'll wait here with the General's men. They'll be waiting to dispel the attackers, capturing people of key importance for questioning. Shed as little blood as possible. Do you have any questions for me?"
"Yes, ma'am. As the walkers know me by disguise, in tonight's raid I will appear in my actual form, and they will not recognize me. As for Bruckner, I will have him cover much of his face for the interrogation, so that Chesler cannot identify him. Does that satisfy you?"
"Yes. Xavier, can you accommodate them?"
Carollo asked, turning to the gaunt man in the half-moon mask. Heartstone produced another cloak, identical to the one Nima had worn last night to infiltrate the Walker's headquarters. He also handed Bruckner a mask similar to his own, stained a mix of crimson and black to cover the top half of the swordsman's face.
Here, it wouldn't do to have the arena's new champion seen doing covert business for the general people. Would talk.
Tadalak gave them both tight hugs around their knees, saying to Nima, "Little sister, take care of Ox. I'm afraid he'll be lost without Tadalak." To Bruckner, he said, "If anyone crosses you out there, Ox, just do to them what you did to Sliss this morning."
You do service to Enjulik.
Nessalia Carollo said to the two companions as they bowed before her.
King Sazarkand will hear of your diligent efforts on his behalf.